Desuhiko Thunderbolt is a character from Master Detective Archive's Raincode. He's part of the main cast, one of the master detectives that managed to make it into Kanai Ward. His forte is disguise, which is the ability to perfectly mimic another person both visually and mentally. He features prominently in the game's second chapter, where his forte really comes in handy. From what I've seen, Desuhiko is probably the least popular of the game's main cast. And while people's dislike of him is not without its reasons, I'd like to give him a fair chance. Today, I'll be taking a closer look at Desuhiko to explain why there's more heart to him than you probably think. Fortunately and unfortunately, Desuhiko's name is both easy and difficult to analyze. Half of it is much easier than the other. I'll start with the easier part, his last name. Thunderbolt is pretty self-explanatory. By definition, it refers to a flash of lightning that happens at the exact same time as thunder. Lightning and thunder are big, loud, and flashy, so this last name fits Desuhiko pretty well. He wants to have a large presence, and his biggest dream is to become a star. His first name, however, is a bit harder to figure out. It sounds Japanese, but because all of the characters' names are written in katakana, I can't just look up a specific kanji character to find a meaning. The second part of his first name is a lot easier to pin down. Hiko is a suffix for Japanese boys' names, and it quite literally means boy, so that's one half of it out of the way. The first part, desu, is a bit trickier. Desu is a common way to end a sentence in Japanese, and it can be pretty simply translated as be or is. But it's also a way to transliterate the English word death into Japanese. So with all this considered, Desuhiko's name could mean Death Boy, which would be pretty metal, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for his character. As a detective, he's not actually assigned to murders, and he's noticeably pretty squeamish around dead bodies. The other possible meaning of his name would be is boy, which, yeah, he sure is. Hi, I'm adding this in post because this was something I hadn't noticed before writing the script and recording the rest of the video, but when it comes to transliterating the word death into Japanese, obviously as I mentioned before, desu is a way to do that, but when I was taking screenshots for the video as I was editing, I noticed that desu can also mean death metal, which is referring to a genre of music, and since Desuhiko's biggest dream is to be a star, and specifically a music star, this could add to the potential meaning of his name. Desuhiko's design is pretty neat. I don't dislike it. His illustration shows a bunch of clothing coming out of his backpack behind him, which is a reference to his disguise forte and how the backpack is necessary for him to use it. A lot of the characters in Raincode have some sort of shape or design in their eyes. Desuhiko's eyes each have a 5-pointed star. The connection here is quite literal in that he wants to be a star, or as he puts it, a superstar detective. Desuhiko also wears a lot of decorative pins on his coat lapels. I have no idea where he got all of them or why he wears them, but maybe it's just to make his coat look less plain. That sounds like something that he would do. Also, he's very short. He's one of the shortest characters in the game. I'm pretty sure the only ones shorter than him are Yuma and Makoto, and that's only by an inch. I just think it's pretty funny, and it's also the reason why Shinigami gives him the nickname Shorty Detective. So yeah, I think Desuhiko looks pretty cool. I dig the beanie he's got in his illustrations, but he's unfortunately not actually wearing it most of the time. There's a decent amount to not like about Desuhiko's personality, but there's also quite a bit to like. When he's first introduced, he's shown to be a bit short-tempered and easily frustrated. He's playing a game with Halara where he has to light 10 matches in a row. He becomes upset with Yako when he barges into the room without knocking and tries to look for any reason he can think of to explain that he didn't lose the game. This is a point I'll elaborate on later, but Desuhiko's behavior towards women is not exactly the best. It's one of the main reasons that a lot of players are not too fond of him. He's frequently concerned with trying to pick up girls. At least once or twice, he says he's about to head out to hit on women before correcting himself and saying that he's gonna do investigative work instead. A lot of the things he does are to try and impress girls, too. Desuhiko is shown to be pretty full of himself. He wants to be a star and will seize any opportunity he can get to take the spotlight. He views a lot of the things he does as a way to make himself known, like when he sees the direct order from number 1 as a chance to get promoted, or in the second chapter when he goes on the theater stage with his guitar to play a song. For the first part of the second chapter, he also comes across as pretty arrogant. He frequently calls Yuma rookie and doesn't acknowledge him as an actual detective. He sees himself as superior because he has a detective deed and Yuma doesn't. Although you might expect a detective to be accustomed to gruesome scenes, Desuhiko is an exception. In the second chapter, when Karen dies, Desuhiko is pretty disturbed and freaked out. He's not assigned to murder cases and instead usually handles undercover investigations because of the nature of his forte. Now, I know I've just listed a lot of negatives about Desuhiko's personality, but there are some positives too. For one, despite his general demeanor, Desuhiko is actually quite clever and intelligent. This is especially displayed in his DLC sub-story, Charisma Killed the Cat. He puts together an incredibly convoluted but nearly successful plan to catch a thief. He's also quick thinking. When Karen dies, although he's too disturbed to actually carry out an investigation, he instead decides to use his teacher disguise to lead the students away from the scene so Yuma can investigate. Desuhiko's strong will is a pretty admirable trait of his. He's determined to be both a detective and a star, and refuses to give up on either path. In the fourth chapter, he wants to find a way out of the secret lab and tries to get everyone else to make a move. Twice during the game, Desuhiko is willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of someone else. In chapter 2, he attacks and restrains Martina in an attempt to give Yuma a chance to escape. In chapter 4, he does the same thing to Yomi, this time to allow Yuma to run and find Yako. Also, in the second volume of his Gumshoe Gab, Yuma describes Desuhiko as a good mentor. He says he's easy to talk to, considerate in subtle ways, and kind-hearted. Overall, I actually think Desuhiko's personality is pretty solid. He has easily definable traits and clear positives and negatives. I think he kind of grows on you the longer he sticks around and the more you see from him. Desuhiko's role prior to Chapter 2 is pretty minimal. He's introduced in the prologue, but does very little because not much happens in the prologue anyway. He doesn't show up much in Chapter 1 either, although at the very end of the chapter he does reveal that his investigation discovered the Peacekeeper's rise to power has caused a struggle within Amaterasu. But in Chapter 2, Desuhiko becomes far more present. He uses his disguise forte to help Yuma sneak into Aetheria Academy to investigate the death of Kurumi's friend Aiko. It's this same forte that allows Yuma to investigate Kaden's death. By dressing up as Yoshiko, Warina, Kurane, and Martina, Yuma is able to gather a lot of information that he otherwise wouldn't have been able to find. Then, once the investigation concludes, it's time for the Mystery Labyrinth, and Desuhiko is honestly not super helpful here. He spends 45% of his time hitting on Shinigami, another 45% being scared shitless of things happening in the labyrinth, and the final 10% actually being useful. He draws a map of the how routes to show that all three are connected. This is actually pretty crucial because Desuhiko's map is actually what leads to the revelation that there are 3 culprits in the case instead of 1. The murder just wouldn't have been possible for a single person alone to carry out. I actually kind of like Desuhiko's development during Chapter 2, specifically his relationship with Yuma. He starts out the chapter calling Yuma rookie and being rude and dismissive towards him, but by the end of it he's calling him my man instead and acting like they've always been the best of pals. I really like their friendship. I think it's pretty sweet. Then Desuhiko kind of disappears from the narrative and doesn't do anything in Chapter 3, but he reappears in Chapter 4. His disguise forte allows himself and the other detectives to sneak into Amaterasu's secret lab, minus Yuma, who got in because of Makoto. Desuhiko is among the first to discover Dr. Huesca's body, along with Yuma and Fubuki. When the group is cornered, he's determined to find a way for them to escape. He also grows very frustrated with Vivia when he refuses to investigate the doctor's death or search for a way out. At the end of the mystery, when Huesca's murder has been solved and Yomi has been arrested, Desuhiko is devastated by Yako's death. At first, he tries to tell Fubuki not to cry, and then he ends up crying with her instead. Desuhiko became a lot more likable in Chapter 4. I remember being kind of undecided on him after Chapter 2 because his antics were really annoying, but after Chapter 4, I liked him a lot more. Desuhiko doesn't appear in Chapter 5 because none of the detectives do. He appears again in the epilogue of the game where he bids farewell to Yako before leaving Kanai Ward. Desuhiko's DLC episode is pretty short, although all of the sub-stories are, but I still find it pretty interesting. The episode follows his attempts to catch the nine-tailed cat, a legendary thief in Kanai Ward. The cat has a good reputation because they sell the things that they steal and use that money for good causes. Desuhiko seems pretty jealous of the cat's fame because, of course he is. Look at who we're talking about here. He gathers information from the locals about what the cat might look like and puts together a disguise based on the information he finds. After apparently catching the cat, he agrees to an interview with a reporter named Nine. Shenanigans ensue, and by shenanigans I mean Death Note level Uno reverse card type of shenanigans, and it's revealed that Nine is the nine-tailed cat. Desuhiko's plan almost works. He's discovered the cat's identity and has her cornered. He could defeat her right then and there, but instead he completely fumbles the bag by proposing to her, giving her the ring she wanted to steal, and letting her get away. Although it's not my favorite of the DLC episodes, I still really like it. It was cool to see Desuhiko in action with his forte, and it was nice to see how sharp and intelligent he can be. As a master detective, Desuhiko's forte is disguise. This is the ability to visually and mentally mimic another person. He's good at not just looking like someone else, but also acting like them. His backpack is required to use his forte because it's where he carries all of his tools for it. Desuhiko insists there's no supernatural element to his disguise, but I kind of have to doubt him on that one. He says someone's height can be adjusted by messing with the joints, and even he admits that it has its limits, but we see him carry out some pretty drastic height changes. He successfully disguises himself as Yako, who is a whole 1.3 inches taller than him. His forte also allows Yuma to disguise himself as Martina, despite the height difference of 1.2 inches. In order for his disguise to work, Desuhiko must have a pretty incredible memory. By his own word, he only needs to see a face or hear a voice once to perfectly replicate it. In his Gumshoe Gab, Desuhiko describes the origin of his disguise forte. He says that when he was younger, he had a lot of self-esteem issues and was constantly trying to be someone else. This is where his affinity for disguises developed and later became his forte as a master detective. I think these self-esteem issues that Desuhiko describes can be tied to a lot of other aspects of his character. By the very nature of his forte itself, it seems like he's always trying to be someone he's not. I said earlier that I would come back to this point later, so here we are. Desuhiko's behavior towards women is questionable at best, and it's understandably the biggest reason why a lot of players don't like him. He's constantly going around and hitting on women, which obviously is not something you should be doing. But it's fine. He's a fictional character, not an actual person whose actions have real-world implications, so we're going to treat him like a fictional character. One thing I noticed about Desuhiko's constant flirting is that he pretty much never approaches women as himself. Sure, we see him do it in the DLC episode, but that's to gain information. In Chapter 2, when Yuma has to track him down to ask him for help, he asks multiple women in Kanai Ward if they've seen him. They all describe what Desuhiko looked like, but he was in a disguise. He wasn't talking to them as himself. Also of note is he asked a lot of these women what kind of guy they liked. He wasn't trying to find someone who would be interested in him for, well, him. This could be rooted in his self-esteem issues. He doesn't see the real him as good enough, so he's instead trying to be what other people like or would want from him. Desuhiko's in-game profile says his attempts to pick up women frequently fail because he's a goofball, and he's not really bothered by this. Which is fine on its own, but this seems to contradict how upset he is when Shinigami rejects him at the end of the Mystery Labyrinth. So why the difference? Why is he so upset by her rejection when his profile says he's not really bothered by women turning him down? I have a possible explanation. Like I mentioned before, most of the time we hear about Desuhiko hitting on women, he's disguised as someone else. But with Shinigami, he wasn't in a disguise. He was approaching her as himself. So maybe that's why her rejection seems to cut so deep. He didn't have the layer of separation he usually has when he wears a disguise. Desuhiko definitely needs to fix his attitude and behavior, and I can't blame anyone for disliking him because of the way he acts. But overall, as part of his character, it's not a terrible aspect, and it can be tied to other parts of him. Desuhiko calls himself a superstar detective and wants to be a star. He's constantly looking for opportunities to prove himself, and because of this, he comes across as pretty self-absorbed. Desuhiko describes the origin of his dream to be a star in his gumshoe gab. He went undercover as the singer of a band. Although he hadn't wanted to be a star before then, he developed the dream after standing on the stage for the first time. Desuhiko describes himself as skilled with guitar and bass, as well as good at singing. He thinks the aura is the most important aspect of being a star. This could be why he acts so cocky and self-assured all the time. He believes radiating an air of confidence is crucial to achieving his dream of being a star. If we return to Desuhiko's self-esteem issues, his dream of being a star could be an attempt to resolve those. Maybe he thinks becoming a star will prove that he's worthy. Maybe he wants to chase after something that he can achieve on his own merit. Or maybe he sees becoming a star as a way to figure out who he really is. Desuhiko could have ditched his career as a detective and dedicated himself fully to becoming a star. Or he could have done the opposite. Give up on his dream so he can continue his work as a detective. But he did neither of those things. He saw no reason to choose between them, and so he chose both. Even if it's a difficult path, he's willing to walk it because he's determined to make it work. Desuhiko was a character I had to try very hard to like. If I hadn't put in any effort, I probably wouldn't have liked him at all. At best, I would have remained neutral and undecided. I'm generally not a fan of the sort of pervert or womanizer type of character, so I really expected to end the game just not really liking this guy. I'm really glad I put in the effort to like Desuhiko. Now, as a person in real life, I would find him utterly unbearable. But like I said before, he's a fictional character, and as a character, I like him just fine. I think putting in the extra effort to like him is what allowed me to pick up on a lot of the details that I otherwise might have missed. Desuhiko definitely became more bearable throughout the game. I especially like his friendship with Yuma and his presence in Chapter 4. He really grew on me, and after I wrote out the script for this analysis, I honestly liked him even more. After I finished Raincode, I knew I was gonna want to make videos about the characters. Desuhiko was originally going to be the first one that I made a video about, but then a certain someone started spinning around in my brain like a microwave, and I had a sudden change of plans. But hey, I got to him now. With everything said and done, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and consider subscribing because I will definitely get to the other Raincode characters someday. I'll see you later, and have a good day.